We're here with Chris Barton, author of How to Make a Book About My Dog. Chris, welcome to AASL National.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me here.
First things first, I want to know what inspired you to write this book about your dog?
So there are two origin stories. One of them is in the book itself, in the first page, where I talk about how when I visit schools, there are two questions I'm asked a lot. How do you make the books, and are you ever going to write a book about your dog? But the other part of the origin story was years ago when I was working on a book with the same editor, Carol Hens at Lerner, called about dazzle ships. I had a really hard time figuring out how to tell that story, so I was trying to write that story under the title, How to Write a Book About Dazzle Ships. And my editor said, you know, it's a really interesting approach, but it might work better with a topic people actually already knew something about, like how to write a book about a dog. And so I kind of filed that away, and then years later, I combined those two, those two ideas, and that's how this came about.
Awesome. Can you tell our viewers a bit about Ernie? Why was it important to include your dog Ernie in this book?
Well, I'd already gotten in the habit of, when I would get to the Q&A portion of my school visits, I would show a picture of my wife, who's also an author in one of her books, and also Ernie, because I know that kids like seeing pictures of dogs, and I'm trying to win their favor. So I was already getting these questions about him. But it also occurred to me that if I'm going to make a book about how books are made, there needs to be some book within the book at the heart of it. And I thought, well, kids are clearly interested in Ernie in particular, and in dogs in general. Why not have him at the heart of it? And Carol had planted that seed years ago about how to write a book about a dog, and that was the first thing I tried for the book within the book, and it was absolutely a good fit.
Now, this book, it's very different from some of your previous books about the Oklahoma City bombing and World War I ships. I'm sorry. Was shifting to a lighter topic a conscious choice for you, and does this book tie into those other books in any way?
I don't think it was a conscious choice necessarily. I generally write about things that I want to know more about. And so I wanted to understand better the experiences of the community surrounding the Oklahoma City bombing. I wanted to understand better how dazzle camouflage came to be and how it worked or whether it worked. And I wanted to understand better the bookmaking process beyond just my own perception of it. So I wasn't looking to write something lighter. And I have written some other nonfiction books that were lighter as well. This is definitely as far as the quantity of dumb jokes, there are far more in this than I've had in any of my other nonfiction books. But I do think the experiences with dazzle ships and with All of a Sudden and Forever, my Oklahoma City book, my experiences of making those books figured into the story I tell about how books are made. I did look back at my own previous work in making nonfiction picture books, so I could think through the steps that were involved in making the book, if I were to make a book about Ernie.
And as we can tell here, you're very well versed in the process of making a book, but did you learn anything new about that process by reanalyzing it for this book?
Well, I got a much better appreciation of all the different roles that are involved in making a book. And when kids would ask me at school visits, how do you make the books? I would say, well, I can tell you about writing, I can tell you about researching and revising, but there are a whole lot more jobs that go into making a book beyond the roles played by the people whose names appear on the cover. But I couldn't really tell them what all those roles were. I knew editor, I knew art director, but I never had needed to know all of those. So I did learn a lot about the different jobs. I went desk to desk at the offices of Lerner Publishing to interview people about the jobs that they do making books such as All of a Sudden and Forever and Dazzle Ships. One of the biggest questions I know that students have when they want to know how to make books is, how do you make those hard covers? I mean, they're talking about the physical object. How do you make the books, and what makes that cover so stiff? Because I feel like that's the one last thing standing between them and being published authors is that hardcover. And so we made sure that I got that information. It's in the timeline at the back of the book. kind of explaining how the hardcovers are made. So for some kids, that may be the most important fact in the entire book, and that was something I learned along the way is what goes into making those hardcovers.
Great. Now you've kind of touched on this already, but the collaborative nature of creating a book, and you really stress that here in your book. Was that especially an important component for you to include, especially considering the book's young audience? Why is collaboration, especially being open to collaboration and criticism, important?
Well, it's been important for me ever since my very first book, which was called The Dayglow Brothers, the true story of Bob and Joe Switzer's Bright Ideas and Brand New Colors, which got 23 rejections along the way before I found the publisher for it. But with those rejections came feedback. And so I learned the importance of taking in that sort of criticism, looking for ways, looking beyond just they said no to, well, what did they say that I can use to make that better? I've always stressed in talking with kids that the most important ingredient in making any picture book is trust, mutual trust all around between the author and the editor, and between the author and the illustrator. Even if it's someone you've never met before, and most of the illustrators of my books, I've never met, at least not until after the book was finished. But I think it's important to emphasize that no matter where somebody is, even if you've never met them before, you can learn to develop that trust that they're going to do the best job they can do, and you can do the best job you can do, and you can come up with something that's far greater than you ever would have managed to do if you were kind of dictating to everybody else what they should do for this. I could never have told Sarah Horn how to make the art so fantastic and how to make a book about my dog. I just had to trust the process that the learner was going to find the right illustrator, and that illustrator was going to do something, whatever it was, that turned out to be fantastic.
Now, for any kids out there who might be watching who want to write a book, but they're intimidated about getting started and unsure where to start, do you have any words of advice for them?
I would recommend that they keep in mind that this book is about how a nonfiction picture book to be distributed in schools and libraries and bookstores is made. That's not the path they necessarily need to go down. When I first made what I thought of as a book, I was in second grade. I was 7 years old. The book was 2 pages long. I did everything myself. It did not take me the 4.5 to 5 years that it usually takes for one of my picture books to get made. So I would say keep in mind that you may have a different objective in making your book if you're a kid than I had in making this particular book. It doesn't have to be perfect. Everything you write is going to get better by rewriting it. If I were to rewrite that book I made when I was in second grade, The Ozzie Brothers Meet the Monsters, it would be a better book than the one that I made when I was in second grade. But getting that work finished, having something you can share with your friends, that's always been super motivating to me to make a story as good as I can make it, is knowing that there's at least one other person who's looking forward to reading what I've written. And so I would think finding or creating a writing community, even if it's just one other person you can share that story with, that's going to make the process a whole lot more satisfying.
And now we're here at AASL National. Do you have a particular memory from your childhood about a school library or school librarian that really sticks with you?
I do. It's not necessarily a favorable memory, but I do have a favorable memory that I'll follow that up with. So when I was in elementary school, when I was in first grade, I was told early on that because I was a first grader, I was not allowed to check out books from the third and fourth grade side of the library. I don't know if this was a librarian telling me or just some figure of authority who was in the library, but that person heard very quickly from my mom that I was not going to be limited to just one side of the library, that I could check out anything and read anything I wanted. So that was not a great school reading experience. It turned out great because I had access to the whole library. But when I was in fourth grade, I was a big fan of Judy Blume, and I was a big fan of Tales of a Fourth Grade Nothing. When I was in fourth grade, her sequel, Super Fudge, was published. We did not have a bookstore in my hometown, but my grandparents lived out in Lubbock, Texas. They had a mall, they had a bookstore. Went there for Thanksgiving, got Super Fudge, brought it home, and my fourth grade teacher saw how much I loved that book, she recognized how much that book meant to me. She let me read Super Fudge out loud to my entire fourth grade classroom, which became not only my best memory of fourth grade, but I think probably my best memory of all of elementary school. So there was someone there who encouraged, you know, that love of reading and that love of books. And so I always think of Mrs. Garrett and letting me read Super Fudge to my classmates.
Awesome. Chris, thanks so much for joining us today.
Oh, it's my pleasure.